a nice loud.
No film school. Hello, my name is Zach Quinones. For my fucking, what was my intro last time?
You're
Welcome to
mostly a
Lowriders.
failure.
Yeah, mostly a failure, slightly successful. Hi, welcome to Lowriders. This is another episode for the writing studio. My name is Zach Quinones. I'm a screenwriter in LA, mostly a failure, somewhat moderately successful, depending how you look at it. And we're going to talk about screenwriting tips, but we're going to go a little bit different with it. So what I did was I looked up 10 screenwriting tips or advice, whatever you want to call it, from Taika Waititi. That's how you say his name?
Taika Waititi.
Taika Waititi. Tacos with titties. Tacos with titties. Taika Waititi. The motherfucker who made Thor Ragnarok. But I'm going to read these and I might give my opinion on some of them. It's probably an irrelevant opinion because he's way more successful than me, but it's just kind of good to, I don't want to say challenge, but just sort of have a different pushback on some things, if there's any. But I think the most important thing to get out of this is to understand how fucking simple screenwriting is and how common the approach and the general experience is for all screenwriters across the board. He's obviously very successful. He's more successful than 99.9% of us ever will be. But when I read through these things, they're just so common. It's good to read them and realize that I don't want to say there's nothing special about him. Obviously there is, but the act of screenwriting is doesn't require anything super special. There's no real special sauce to it at the core in its DNA. It's everybody from top to bottom has these experiences, has these outlooks, and even generally would give this advice to everybody. But I think it's always good to it's okay to kind of put you on the level sometimes with some of these, more successful people. So if you Google 10 screenwriting tips from Waititi, there's one on nofilmschool.com. There's another one on Screencraft, and they basically give the same tips. They're just written a little bit differently. So I might go back and forth between the two, but we'll just go through them. So on Screencraft, the one that says, this is like the first one on both. Let's see. Let me catch up. One is he says don't take the easy way. So this is actually one of the other pieces of advice that I think is a little bit more nuanced and not that people don't really think about as much. And what he says, the excerpt is, the easy way ultimately becomes the hard way because you end up paying a price. You basically just make mediocre work. And it goes on to talk more about that. But essentially I kind of look at it as going through the motions. Now, my only pushback to this is some of you should always take the easy way, mainly because screenwriting in terms of skill and talent is on a spectrum. I don't do certain things in screenwriting because I know I am not good enough to do that. Or I just don't have the certain skill set to do that. So, for example, like a superhero movie, I could probably never write one. I don't think if I ever wrote one, it would be good because just the way the type of writer I am and the certain skills that I have, it's not going to translate into that. And so that's kind of like a parallel to this idea that, don't take the easy way. I genuinely agree with that. You should kind of choose the hard way sometimes, but you also have to understand sometimes maybe the easy way is the best way for you. But it is good to kind of challenge yourself and take the hard way, maybe in particular scenes, maybe not for a whole screenplay. But that's a really good nuanced advice that I think you can kind of really discuss and dissect. The second one, let's go to No Film School. It says, no matter how unconventional your characters are, always make them more human and more relatable. Now, the one thing that I always say, this is something I 100% agree with. You don't write characters, you write humans. That's like the biggest rule. And I think a way to kind of repackage this sort of tip. Don't write characters, write human beings, write people. And every character that I've ever written, it's never been anybody I've made up. It's somebody that I know in real life or a sort of hybrid or an amalgamation of multiple people that I know in real life. And that's what makes it really easy to write characters. Um, it's sort of like the same in real life. Like you'll meet a person and you're like, this person's a character. And it's sort of like weird how it kind of inverts itself. But I think that's the main thing to really grasp out of this is you don't think of like, oh, what's a good character I could write. Think of like what an interesting person you can write, a person that you know. That's why I think it's really important for us as screenwriters to be social people, even if we're not very social ourselves, like force ourselves to be social and talk to people, get experiences, meet people, because it makes the whole process of putting them into a story very easy. The other thing that both of these have that are kind of early on is the concept of failure. Failure is a brilliant thing. That's basically one of his rules. It teaches you what not to do, and you end up coming up with better ideas. That's one of the things why I think I've been very good whenever I've workshopped screenplays with other screenwriters or given any type of advice to first-time writers, is I can always tell them, this is what you want to avoid. If you do all these things, you're going to fail or your screenplay is going to suck. Avoid those and it's going to make the process of finding what's good and what is successful a whole lot easier. And obviously I know certain aspects of screenwriting that are roads to success or pathways to success, but I think it's just much more valuable to know what doesn't work or what will cause failure. Put the first draft away for a while. And that's something I've always told a lot of writers is once you get the first draft done, just kind of leave it and let it marinate. But this is something I've noticed with a lot of first-time writers is when they finish a first draft, they get very antsy about the rewrites, the revisions, the tweaks, and they feel as if 2 weeks go by, a month go by, they're fucking up or there's something wrong and they get anxiety about it. And it's just, I think it's actually the most natural thing to not touch a script after the first draft for a while. And I mean a while, there's been times where I've gone a year, 2 years before I go back and actually look at a first draft and start rewriting it. And I don't know if I've mentioned this in other videos, but when you really think about it, you wouldn't want to start a rewrite or even a second draft until you've become a significantly better writer. So if you do a first draft and you give yourself a year to become a better writer, when you start that second draft, when you do that rewrite, you're going to be more skilled, you're going to be more precise, you're just going to be more self-aware, and you're going to be able to really elevate that script to a new level. Okay, so let's go for another one. Let me see if I can combine a couple of these. This is a good one, actually. Don't just read brilliant scripts and watch the classics. Learn to embrace bad experiences, bad creative experiences. Watch bad movies, read bad books. All of that stuff sometimes teaches you what not to do. So it kind of aligns with the failure thing. But I think also one of the good things about reading bad stuff, or quote unquote bad, is you can actually get really great ideas from those. Because a lot of times bad scripts, bad movies, people just kind of avoid them like the plague. They don't think they can learn anything from it. But the way I kind of see it is like, you see a bad idea executed poorly, you can get an idea to be like, well, the idea, or like not the bad idea, good idea executed poorly is it turns out bad, but you can see where you can take that same thing and make it better. And so you can actually pull a lot of things from bad scripts and bad movies that you yourself can just elevate to another level or just execute it in a much better way. And I think also it goes back to the whole failure thing. It kind of allows you to learn through other people's failures, and it kind of reduces your chances of failing more than you need to in order to get from point A to point B. All right, so let's see. This is a good one. Don't try to emulate someone else's screenwriting journey. Do you? The great artist didn't try to copy and replicate someone else's career. That's incentive to stick to your own guns and follow your own vision and do your own thing. I mean, this is probably the biggest struggle with every screenwriter, and I think this is such a great advice because it's something off the page that is very, very important. A lot of us try to find some sort of like Konami code to getting like to the next step in our, or the next phase in our screenwriting career journey, or whatever you want to call it. A lot of us will get advice from other screenwriters and then we try to apply that advice, or we hear about this famous screenwriter, successful screenwriter getting their first big deal, and we try to emulate that. But you have to realize a lot of stuff, it's planned, but it's not planned. Like, you make a plan and that kind of guides you, but then what that ultimately does is set you on another trajectory to where you are supposed to be, or where you should be, however you want to put it. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, what you have to do is understand that you have to do what you feel is the correct thing for you. And obviously that doesn't mean don't get advice, or don't see somebody else's certain decisions and strategy and think and just completely ignore it, because obviously you can gain a lot from that, and you can get a sort of idea of how you can go about your own pathway to that. But you really, really need to do it your way. You have to do it your way. You have to be an individual, and you have to retain your own identity for that. Because ultimately, if you do get to where you want to be at, if you've already set the standard of how you want to do things, that's going to make it a whole lot more. That's going to make it a lot easier for you to maintain control over your career, your identity, and your craft as a writer. Some of these are just like challenge yourself. Yeah, no shit. Always search for a better answer. No shit. So I'm not going to really go over those. But a good thing he puts is even the pros suffer from self-doubt. And he says, writing for me is a very lovely part of the process. I usually do veer between crushing self-doubt and an overwhelming sense of triumph. And that's super important, because it doesn't change. I think once people see somebody become successful as a screenwriter, they assume that that kind of goes away. The only difference is status and probably money, but it stays the same. Like, whatever you're feeling right now in terms of the process of writing, the self-doubt and the triumph, that will always stay the same. And I always attribute that to being, when I was an athlete in college, I ran cross country, and I would always get people saying, wow, it must be so easy for you to run. And the answer for me, whenever they would say that, is no. It's just as hard as when it was when I first started and I sucked, because that doesn't change ever. Just because I get faster doesn't mean it becomes easier. It stays just as hard as it was before. So I think that's super, super important for every one of you to realize this doesn't get any easier. It may not get harder per se, but this, constant self-doubt and triumph and the struggle is always going to be there, at least from the creative process. I mean, you hear all the time of just writers in general that are highly successful, that have writer's block for a year, 2 years. So I think that's very comforting to know that the self-doubt that you feel, it's very normal. It's always going to be there. So use that as a way to get out of that and to continue to get that triumphant feeling. Now let's see if we can find one more. He says write everything by hand first. I think that's a preference. I know people that are really great screenwriters that never touched a pencil or a pen. Remember, film is an escape, so don't be afraid to embrace human absurdity in your writing. Find the right balance between humor and drama. I think that's a really, 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 really great piece of advice, because sometimes when we write, we forget we're writing a movie. We are writing a movie, okay? The rules of life don't apply in a movie. So your character has the ability your movie has the ability to go absurd. And of course you can overdo it, but we have to remember, we are making movies. We are writing movies. We have the liberty to take it a little bit farther, and it's fiction. So let's indulge in that. And I think a lot of people forget that. They try to be too close to reality a lot of times, when sometimes you just have to throw that shit out the window and entertain, because at the end of the day, you have to entertain. This is the entertainment business. And as a screenwriter, even if you want to just be an avant-garde or an indie person, you still have to entertain. The person still has to enjoy the work long enough to read it for 90 to 120 pages. So, embrace that aspect of it. Well, one thing he gives is figure out the beginning and the end first. I kind of agree and disagree with that. Me personally, I can do a combination. Sometimes I'll know the beginning and have no idea how it's going to end. And to me, that's the best part of writing, is figuring out how it's going to end. So it's kind of like I'm on the discovery journey as well. Sometimes I have an ending, I have no idea how I'm going to get there. So that's another fun process of how do I create all the story to get to this ending. And I've done the other way where I've had a beginning and an end, and I figure out the middle. So I think that's a preference thing again. I don't think you should, if you try that out and it's really fucking hard for you and it's struggling, stop doing it. Find your process of things. If you're somebody that would much prefer to not even have a beginning and end and you just have a character and you just go based off that character, do that. But it's more of a preference. It's an interesting thing to maybe consider, but I wouldn't consider that as like necessarily a good or bad piece of advice. But yeah, that's it. You can check these out at No Film School and Screencraft. Just type in on Google 10 screenwriting tips from Taika Waititi, whatever. Hey man, nobody could pronounce my last name for like 20 years, so I'm not too worried about that. But all right, awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in, and again, videos every week. I need to figure out a fucking outro, man. Like, it's so odd.